hear the lived story
Hmm.
of what got you from point A to point B and what your experience was with either marginalized communities or being marginalized, sometimes as
Hmm.
women in a particular field.
Oh, sure.
You get that?
Um, sure. So, short version, I'll try to make it short. I grew up in Evanston, Illinois, which has changed enormously. I have not been back. I left to go to college and never went back. My
Mhm.
father died when I was a sophomore in college. So that was, but I was from, at that time, um, what would have been called a mixed marriage, which is that my mother was Ashkenazi Jewish, very secular family, and my father, and sort of upper middle class to upper middle class, never, not religious at all. Roosevelt and the New Deal were their religion. My great grandfather was worked with the Democratic Party in Chicago. He ran the first ward, which was the Loop, the business section of Chicago, the really power, with a guy named Hinky Dink, who was Irish. They were politicians, and and my father was from a working class Italian, very religious Catholic family. So there was no love lost between the two families. And when my father died, the Italian family said, "We don't want to see you anymore." Um, and I've never seen them again. My grandmother had died 3 weeks before my father, so it was my grandfather and the two sisters and their family who said that. Um, but Evanston, where we grew up, the first question anybody asked anybody was, which Presbyterian church do you go to? And I was the darkest complected person anyone had ever seen. So the first question out of everybody's mouth was, what kind of a name is Malpede? And Malpede, it's an Italian name, and it means bad foot or hard way to walk, but like Oedipus. So there was that. I always felt like an outsider in this totally Presbyterian. Evanston has really changed and it's much more diverse now. But as I say, I've never been back. Um, then I went to the University of Wisconsin, which was also pretty Midwestern and white. Then I moved to New York, where I've lived since I was 19.
Mhm.
And since 1987, I've lived in Clinton Hill, Fort Greene, Brooklyn. Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, and Bed-Stuy are old Black neighborhoods that were thick with great jazz musicians, great artists, fine artists, writers. Um, the neighborhoods have been gentrified. When we moved in '87, um, the neighborhood was much more, well, less gentrified. And there were no restaurants, but there was always this very vibrant art scene. And the art scene, music scene was always many different kinds of people, but especially Black artists.
Mhm.
So I live in a community that is rich with cultural, uh, Black culture. And uh, um, now that it's more gentrified, Europeans tend to live here.
Mhm.
People in mixed marriages tend to live here because it's an open, very friendly community. I mean, we start the day by saying good morning to everybody on the street, whether you know them or not, which is a Black tradition. You greet people. Um, and so there's that. Then I taught for over a decade at John Jay College, which is part of the CUNY system. And it's John Jay College for Criminal Justice is the full name. It's the cop college. And I taught theater there. And I taught many different kinds of theater, but I taught a lot of James Baldwin, who I loved. But the student body at John Jay is either inner city kids, mainly of color, um, and new immigrants
Mhm.
from Eastern Europe, from Africa, from wherever new immigrants are coming. So it's a very diverse student body. Very few what we would call white kids, always one or two in a class, But so um, so that was, a wonderful experience because James Baldwin, who grew up in New York City and went to New York City public schools,
Mhm.
was actually spotted by a white elementary school teacher as being a brilliant kid. And she went to his house, and his father, who was not his biological father, but his stepfather, hated white people and was a preacher, had his own church with a very small congregation. And he preached about white devils every Sunday to a small group of people. This woman came to the house in Harlem, and she asked for permission to take little James Baldwin to the theater. And she was given permission, and she took him to theater, she took him to opera, she took him to museums. So this was, and there were, because he was obviously a brilliant child, there were several white teachers in elementary school and then in high school too, who saw his promise and befriended him. And of course, Baldwin had many love relationships with white men. He was, anyway, when I was teaching at John Jay, nobody had ever heard of Baldwin. They don't teach him in the New York City public schools because of his homosexuality. And so it was my pleasure and privilege to introduce New York City kids who came up through the public schools, lived in, Harlem or Brooklyn, first in their family, often to go to college, to introduce them to Baldwin and to get them to love Baldwin as I do. So that's some of it. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
you know.
So you were raised very differently than certainly I was. I had no exposure to the arts or to diversity or much of anything. We lived in a segregated little community
Yeah.
when I
Where
grew
did
up.
you grow up?
I grew up outside of Las Vegas, a little place called Henderson, Nevada,
Oh, okay. So
and
yeah,
a long time ago.
yeah, me too. Me too. I had exposure to the arts because my grandmother had studied acting, and she still performed. Not when I knew her, but when she was a younger mother, she performed in Chicago. And my mother also performed. She performed with the little theater, the local Evanston Little Theater, but she also had a radio show that was called Something for the Girls in the 50s that she produced, and she sold the ads, she produced it, and she interviewed people, including Eleanor Roosevelt, which was her big, event. So the arts were, I mean, in the family. And I have a twin brother who runs a theater in LA with homeless people. So both of us are in the arts.
So the arts are a way to not only preserve history that's being erased or has been, but create history in the making.
Yes.
Yeah. And how do you envision your role in that? Is that what prompted some of the book writing you've done?
I've mainly been a playwright. So I've written 22 plays that have all been produced. I've directed a number of them. I started, and then I've written books about the theater. Now this is a memoir about my life in the theater, so it's actually a different kind of book. It's the first memoir I've ever written. So when I started writing plays in 1974, there was a feminist movement. Right. And so that informed, because I had never read a play, but I had never read a play written by a woman in undergraduate or graduate school ever. All of my professors were men. I had never had a woman professor. In 1984, a book came out that I created called Women in Theater, Compassion and Hope. And that book was the theoretical writings of people like Lorraine Hansberry, of very well-known people in the theater. Robert Nemiroff, who was Hansberry's white husband. Hansberry was a lesbian, but she was married to Nemiroff, and he was very supportive of her. And they stayed, I think they stayed married until she died. She died at 34 of breast cancer. But he gave me unpublished letters of hers that I put in this book. The book was introductions that I wrote, and then the theoretical writing about their art practice of people like Hansberry. So there were white and black women in the book, their theoretical writing, including a very young drummer named Edwina Lee Tyler, who was the drummer in the play I wrote about Sappho. And she was one of the first women drummers, because drumming was not something that women did traditionally. It was a male thing. And she was taught in the parks in Harlem how to be a drummer by male drummers, but she was also a lesbian woman. So, we were kind of cracking open the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and the feminist movement all were, happening at the same time. And we were breaking a lot of boundaries and, walking through doors.
Making a lot of
had been closed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I came through it about that time, different path, but what's happened here in the last couple of years, and it breaks my heart for my daughters and granddaughters. It has caused me to step out of my white bubble intentionally to say, if I have this unearned privilege, I'm going to use this unearned privilege for people who don't have that, and to elevate some voices, to uncover some history. Because every time I find a new piece of history, like you just told me about Mr. Baldwin, I lose my freaking mind that I was a late in life student, got my master's degree, and I never heard. The things you just don't even know you don't know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, where did you get your master's?
At Gonzaga University in Washington State.
Yeah. Yeah. I never had a woman professor, and I never had a professor of color.
Right.
Right.
Well, I started to get my education. I was 45, I think, when I went back to school. I put 2 husbands and 3 kids through school. It was my turn. And I went to a nice, solid Christian college. Made it 1 year until I tried to take a class that was designed for the pastor track, and I was denied the educational component because I was a woman. That was in 1993, I want to say, maybe 96.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe that was happening in my lifetime.
Right.
So I shifted my education, but the things that the young women today don't know about what it's like not to have these rights and privileges we worked so hard for and took for granted for ourselves, to have them being rescinded.
Yes. You mean reproductive rights?
Like Roe v. Wade, that's just one. Like the challenge to our voting rights, the challenge to our,
well,
birth control.
we're in really, excuse me, can I just?
Absolutely. Yeah. We will pause.
I keep a house phone in case I need it, but I never answer it.
And it's usually junk mail. Yeah.
Anybody important has my cell phone number. We're in budding fascism and racism. He was elected as, by racists to be a racist. I've been going every week to vigil outside immigration court in downtown Manhattan. There's a silent vigil from 12 to 1 on Thursdays. That we go and we hold up signs of photos of people who've been disappeared by ICE, and signs that say cruelty is the whole point of this. The signs have, and we stand in a line, 2 lines. It's gross. Like 100 people come now on Thursdays. So we're in uncharted territory here.
We are.
Yeah.
So when I have historians on, for example, I've had someone from the Underground Railroad, the hidden history of New England. I've had someone from the Holocaust. I've got
Mhm.
someone from, oh, I can't even remember now. I just did her last week.
Mhm. Right.
But as we do that, I'm looking for what, oh, I know it was Asia, the boat people
Oh, the
and
boat people.
the Vietnam era.
Mhm.
And so what I'm curious about, because you have this whole theatrical history and this
Mhm.
activist history and
Mhm. Mhm.
footing that I don't
Mhm.
know anything about. What what resilience was there now 70 years ago, 60 years ago of women that we can draw from today that could help us resist or reinstate rights now in because it is unprecedented is my least favorite and most commonly used word,
Uh-huh.
but women standing in history in their skin, making a difference one life at a time is
Mhm.
not unheard of or uncommon
No, it
or
goes way
undocumented.
back to
Yeah.
Sappho. I mean, I wrote a play about Sappho, uh, called Sappho and Aphrodite. In 1984,
Mhm.
the New York Times would not publish an ad that had the words Sappho and Aphrodite in the same sentence. We could not advertise in the New York Times. And beyond that, in 1984, I had been working in Brooklyn, funded by Brooklyn uh, borough money coming through the Brooklyn Borough President's office. And I lost my funding because of a play called Sappho and Aphrodite.
Uh-huh.
And it was a mixed race cast. I always say in this play, whenever it says in the front of the published version, whenever this play is done, Sappho should be played by a Black woman. The cast should be mixed race. And the reason I did that is that Sappho, Black women have that authority in our culture of being great educators, teachers.
Yeah.
And Sappho was a great poet, but she also ran a school for women on
Mhm.
the Isle of Lesbos.
Uh-huh.
And wealthy men, Greece was totally a patriarchal society, but they would send their daughters to be educated in the arts of poetry, music playing, and sexuality
Mhm.
to the Isle of Lesbos, where Sappho ran her school in the 7th century BC.
Uh-huh.
And then they would come back and be married to,
Okay.
some Greek man who, and then in cloistered in their homes. The men were the public society was male homosexual. The women were
Mhm.
there to breed children.
Uh-huh.
But the before before that, women were very powerful in society. In other words, not necessarily a matriarchy, but women had, great power in society. Fatherhood was unknown.
Mhm.
So women were magical. They blew up, and 9 months later, they had a baby. Wow, how did that happen?
Yeah.
And so before we understood procreation, women were seen, as goddesses. And
Uh-huh.
this memory was still, the cultural memory. So even in classical Greece, where the women were cloistered in the homes, you went from your father's home to your husband's home. You weren't allowed on the streets. You had no public life. You didn't go to the theater. You didn't, but there were public holidays
Mhm.
from where the women took over, and they the they went out and danced and sang and did whatever. It was part of the culture that there would be certain times when the women had
Mhm.
to celebrate and be worshipped, because that came from pre-patriarchy, the
Right.
memory of that. Uh, your question, so many things that you said. I live in a neighborhood that was on the Underground Railroad. The
Okay.
church down the block, Presbyterian Lafayette Presbyterian Church, was a station in the Underground Railroad.
Mhm.
Um, so we have that tradition in this neighborhood, which has traditionally been, as I said, a Black neighborhood. Now
Mhm.
it's very integrated, but it was, you know before the 80s, primarily a Black neighborhood. I had dinner with a friend of mine last night who we were talking about Bedford Stuyvesant. which is was encompassed Clinton Hill, which is right on the border. And she has a not-for-profit in Bed-Stuy. She's a white woman who works in the mainly in the Black community. She taught at Paul Robeson High School, and then she started a not-for-profit called Bailey's Cafe, which is a kind of multi-generational cultural center for mainly people of color. And she was saying Bed-Stuy was the biggest Black community in the country, and always very thick with musicians and artists. So yeah, I because I grew up with only white people, you know, in Evanston, there was a Black neighborhood that was very ghettoized. And then we moved one suburb over to Wilmette, and my parents were not allowed to buy a house that they wanted to buy because they weren't Presbyterian, because one was Italian and one was Jewish. And so then my father found a subdivision, which was very radical at that time. It had a quota system of a third Protestant, a third Catholic, and a third Jewish, no Black people. But there was a Muslim family that lived next door to us that was considered, you know, really out there. Yeah. So I left what was a segregated world to come to New York and live in a multicultural world where I felt much more comfortable.
See, that is, I've never heard that about religious segregation.
Oh yeah.
Before, and for people who live it, that's their normal. That's the normal. I know I went to Louisville and discovered it as one of the last truly segregated city, with still red line districts still.
Yeah.
And again, the things that, you know, Las Vegas, I had no knowledge of, not even in my sphere. But once you start to dig into that, it's like, now I want to read all the plays you've written.
I mean, yes, please do. No, the 1, 2, 3, the fourth play I wrote, which is one of the few that's not been published, was called Making Peace a Fantasy. And it was about the Underground Railroad. It was about the culture in this country right before the Civil War, when there were lots of communes that grew up, sort of utopian communes, and they all had different philosophies. Like the Shakers were celibate, so they were an offsplit of the Quakers, but they were run by a woman named Mother Ann Lee, who was the center of the Shaker community, and at the same time, Harriet Tubman was running the Underground Railroad. She's a character in the play. So the play is about these utopian communities. One was celibate, one was free love. They all had their different, you know, ways to get to nirvana. And the Underground Railroad was running, and the abolitionists were, you know, this was before the Civil War, and it was a very, very rich culture, which of course violence stamps out. And it, you know, it seems to me that when things get too, and this may account for Trump as well, when things get too multicultural, too exciting, people are breaking too many barriers, then there's either a war that happens to crush all of that, or in our most recent case, a kind of reversion to, you know, a white world that really doesn't exist in this country anymore, should not exist. And you know, going after immigrants, going after anybody of color, you know, this is like, take us back to the 50s. But this pattern of people breaking boundaries, and then there being either a war or another kind of social repression to push everybody back, is, you know, is a pattern.
Somebody told me
civil rights movement. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
No, the civil rights movement obviously predates the Vietnam War.
Yes.
What did we do in Vietnam? We drafted all the Black kids, right? Sent them, you know.
Yeah.
And then we started.
Somebody told me last week that history doesn't repeat, it rhymes.
Yeah, well, Marx said history, everything happens twice. The first time, and then I think it was Hegel who added, the first time is tragedy, the second time is farce.
Well, I'll sit with that.
Mhm. Yeah. And we are in kind of a madness, farcical,
Yes,
but very cruel time.
yes,
You
yeah.
know, the cruelty is cruelty for cruelty's sake. I mean, snatching people out of their families on the way to school, out of their, just snatching people off the street. I was
And just ramping up, like doubling down
yeah,
at every deceitful intersection.
yeah,
There's a doubling down.
yeah, 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 yeah.
I don't know.
And of course, it's not going to work. I
Yeah,
hope. I,
we
I
all
think.
hope.
I think and I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Because
I wanted
people
to,
have gone too far. Women like you, I mean, they've let us out of our boxes. We've gone too far.
right,
We're not going to be put back down.
yeah.
You know.
We'll not go quietly into the dark night.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask about your writing because I've written a bit, and the writing that matters, the writing that makes it real, the true stories about me, those are a lot harder to write than some story about history or whatever else. How was your experience, the difference between writing a play, which
Mhm.
any writing has elements of you and your
Of
life and your
course.
story
Of
in it?
course. I was going to say that. You're right.
How
Absolutely.
and how was it different writing your memoir? What was that like for you?
Well, the memoir, I worked, my husband, George Bartenieff, who was a very great actor producer, and he and I ran a theater together. And he was the hidden child in Nazi Germany. His mother was from a very upper class Huguenot family in Germany. His father was a Russian Jew from Ukraine, from Odessa. They had a dance company in Germany. When the Nazis came to power, and George was born 10 days before Hitler became chancellor. When the Nazis came to power, their dance company was immediately outlawed. So George had this background. He was left in Germany. His parents came here in 36. In 39, he and his brother were gotten out of Germany. I tell this story in the book. When George was dying, he had multiple myeloma. He died from complications of treatment, not from the cancer itself. But
Yeah.
He was 89 and a half when he died. But as he got closer to dying, he became more committed to telling his story as a hidden child. The fear of death and the fear that he felt as a very young child kind of were mirrored.
Okay.
And in a way, I'm finishing the story he didn't get to tell because I did more research into his early life and into his family, into the Nazi party member who lived with him, was his uncle by marriage on the same estate where he was hidden. So there were two Jewish children and a Nazi on this big estate that was owned by his great aunt. And they flew the Nazi flag from the turret of the main house. But I also knew that I wanted to write this story. Really, I mean, it came into my head. I have to write this story, not only for him, but for me. Cancer has been a presence in my life. My father died of cancer when I was 19. That's how the book starts, with the story of his death and life. Then a very dear friend of mine, who was also a friend of George's, Julian Beck, who founded the Living Theater, died of cancer in 1985. And I was very involved in I was very close to him, who is a dear friend, mentor. And a woman, Barbara Deming, who was a lesbian feminist, also was very sick with cancer. And I did a lot of activism with her. She was a freedom rider. She had been in jail for a month as a freedom rider. She wrote a book called Prison Notes.
Mhm.
She was also dying of cancer, and I connected Julian and Barbara. So I tell their stories, and then I tell George and my story, which is the bulk of the book. And much of his, I worked with Robert J. Lifton, a man who just died last week, who did wrote about the Holocaust and wrote a very well-known book called The Nazi Doctors, in which he interviewed doctors who went and did experiments on Jewish children during the day and came home at night and bounced their kids on their knees. And, you know, if you've seen the movie Zone of Interest, it was like that, where the Nazis lived in big houses with servants right next to the concentration camps. The smoke blew over their
Yes.
gardens, right? But there was no mention of the concentration camps in the family home, but the men would go work in Auschwitz during the day.
Right.
Anyway, so, and George and I did a play that was, we adapted the Holocaust Diaries of Victor Klemperer, a very well-known, he was a professor. He had to therefore convert to Christianity, because you had to in order to be a professor or a judge or a lawyer in Germany, even before Hitler. And he was married to an Aryan, what the Nazis called an Aryan woman. And the Jewish men who were married to German women were among the last to be deported. So the night before he was supposed to be deported to the death camp, the Allies firebombed Dresden. And he lived through the firebombing of Dresden. So did his wife. And they reunited afterwards, and they went back to their home, now in East Germany. And he became a professor after the war again. Anyway, George and I adapted his diaries. And that was a transformational experience for George, because he had blocked. He said to me, before we started working on the diaries, I was reading a book about the Holocaust. I've done a lot of reading about the Holocaust. And he said, "Why are you always reading all this Holocaust stuff?" And I said, "You're a Holocaust survivor." And he said, "No, I'm not." And that started, it was like he fell down the rabbit hole. That started his recovery of these early memories. He wasn't really a Holocaust survivor. He got out in 1939, but he was a hidden child, and in a family that had Nazis in the family. And he was living with them. And so the tension was there. And he was trying to recover this, because his early life was terrifying. His parents left him when he was 3. He didn't see them again until he was 6. His early life was frightening, and dying was frightening. And he said to me, "I'm afraid of dying." And I said, "You will not be alone." That was the only thing I could promise him. And he died in my arms in the bedroom. He had spent the last week of his life, he had lost language. I tell this whole story in the memoir, but he was still there. He was still present and alert. And all of our friends came, all of our collaborators came to say goodbye. It was one long week of telling jokes, telling stories about what we had done together, theater stories, the way theater people, and George was there just beaming the whole time. And anyway, it was quite an amazing last week, but I knew that I had to write the story, both to finish his story and also to tell my story about these cancer deaths and how I learned to be present for not only life, but death. I feel very blessed that my husband died in my arms without medical intervention, without machines beeping, without any of that.
Yeah. The power of story, and the stories that are getting sanitized by AI,
Oh God.
and people writing with, or ghostwriting through AI. Uh, nothing compares to the lived experience of the author writing in their own words with
Yeah,
their
well,
own
I would hope so.
right.
I,
Right.
I don't know anything about AI. I
Yeah.
stay away from my friend Noam Chomsky, who's in the book, and Noam is 94. He had a stroke, so he's no longer able to communicate. He's
Mhm.
now living in Brazil with his second wife, but we had a long email correspondence for decades. And
Mhm.
but what he's the great linguist and as well as a great political force. But what he says about AI versus that human intelligence with very little information has infinite creativity. AI has all the information in the world and no creativity. So,
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
Uh-huh. And the more that that takes over our social media feeds, the less creative we become.
yeah.
As you know,
I would
because now
propose,
we're consuming instead of creating
yeah,
ourselves.
yeah. I mean, as I say, I try to stay away from it.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, it's kind of like I would think because I have a rich inner life and an active
Mhm.
imagination, and I always had the survival skills you learn in childhood.
Uh-huh.
And without that, at the times that I've been on antidepressants in my life, for example, it has put a blanket on that
Yeah.
so that I can be in lockstep with the systems around me, but
Uh-huh.
at a
Yeah.
cost that I was never willing to sustainably pay.
Yes. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like my
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
value the way my mind works. And
Yeah.
it took me an
Yes.
equestrian accident and a horrible concussion,
Oh
not
dear.
knowing if my brain was going to come back, to
Wow.
say, I like the way my mind works and I am never going to discount that again.
Good for you. Yeah.
So that was
Yeah. Yeah.
my moment.
Yes.
As we and with our audience, this season 3 is Resilience Reimagined because
Uh-huh.
I started this podcast reclaiming joy in DEI, and then DEI became a bad word. So then we
Uh-huh.
said, okay, in diversity, okay, and then I had to choose along the way which hill to die on, and I chose to hold my commitment to not going back, retreating to my white bubble. I
Uh-huh.
chose to hold the line of
Uh-huh.
telling the stories and being upfront and call it what you will or won't. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but but this season, as it has shifted, first we had, the political cycle, so the election cycle, and then that season 2 was resilience redefined. And then come about January, it was like, well, a redefinition isn't going to cut it for us. We got to reimagine this whole thing. And
Uh-huh.
that's when the universe started bringing me guests who are so much richer and deeper than
Uh-huh.
I am, and who I could not have heard in season 1 because I didn't have the bandwidth of
Uh-huh.
mentally to be there.
Interesting.
And so what I
Yeah.
ask my guests then is so what does resilience reimagined look like for women in the world today?
Uh, I'm so many things are going through my head. Obviously, for me, one of the worst words in the English language is widow, right?
Yes.
My accountant, who knew George and me for years, said, "Oh yeah, well, we just don't invite our widowed friends to dinner with us. It's hard." He said this to me on the phone. It's so hard to be a widow because you can't go out with couples anymore. And to a certain extent, that's true. Although I was at a dinner with 50 people over the weekend who had all gone to an art opening, and I was the only one without a partner at
Uh-huh.
this big long table. And I didn't even notice it until afterwards. And I came home and I thought, I couldn't have done that it's been 3 years since George died. The
Yes.
first 2 years of widowhood, I could not have gone to a dinner with 50 people,
Mhm.
and also knowing that I was the only one who wasn't with a couple
Mhm.
it's a very hetero crowd, but it was integrated. There were black and white people there
Right.
as friends. We were all friends from the dog park in our neighborhood, and we went to our friend's art opening.
Mhm.
Um, uh, so resilience for me means both being present for the death of my most very beloved person,
Mhm.
and then learning how to live without him.
Mhm.
And part of that was writing the memoir to
Mhm.
memorialize what we had, the life we lived together, and his early life, and you know,
Mhm.
so I think, you know, I would speak to widows who have to enter, you know, the world again alone, you know,
Right.
at advanced stages, if you're lucky. Some widows are widowed very young, but many of us are not.
Yeah.
Um, and reclaim a space, you know, that I moved in very freely with George. We moved in the avant-garde theater world, the multicultural
Mhm.
world of New York. Now I'm alone doing that.
Okay. All right.
Um, yeah.
And so reclaiming space, I like that. That might be the title of this segment. So reclaiming space, how did you develop? I mean, the grieving process is a process of its own. And when I divorced, I likened it to death. The
Mhm.
difference is that when you are a widow, I imagined, because I've not ever been in that place, that people were more um, uh, compassionate. As a divorcee, they were, it felt
Don't
very
imagine
standoffish,
that.
but it
Don't
doesn't sound
imagine
like
that.
it. It sounds like
No,
it's the same
people
ballpark.
run from death. People
Uh,
run from, you know,
Divorce.
grief. Not
Yeah.
everybody. It was very clear.
Yes.
My oldest friend could not stand my grief.
Oh.
She said to me immediately after George died, she said, "You had a life before George, you'll have a life after George." I could not imagine such a thing at that moment, you know. And so we're still friends, but it's a different kind of, but some people ran toward. My friend Jan, who is also a memoirist, and we're doing a reading on October 3rd together.
Yeah.
She walked with me
Yeah.
every week since George died to this day. We
Mhm.
take long walks, and she
Mhm.
saw me through when I was shaking, when I couldn't speak. And my friend Jerry also, we walked together. So there were two people who walked with me, and they walked through the whole story with me. And they both are cancer survivors.
Mhm.
So they
And
knew.
did you intentionally seek them out, or
No,
no, they just came to
we
you?
were friends.
Yeah.
Jan was a friend of Jan and Winston were friends of George and mine, and
Mhm.
they came to his bed when he was dying. They were part of the inner circle. So we were already friends, but
Mhm.
she's a marvelous person, and she just was there for me. And Jerry, who I'd known before then through the Living Theater, he came to the Shiva, the very unorthodox Shiva I was holding, where people could drop in. And he told me that he was a leukemia survivor. I didn't know that because when George was so sick, I didn't see Jerry. And that was when he was going through his chemo. And so we reconnected after sort of 2 decades of not seeing much of each other. And he lives in Brooklyn. They both live in Brooklyn. And I have a dog. And so we walk through the parks, either Fort Greene Park or Prospect Park
Mhm.
with my dog. and and they walked me through the grief. Finally, I found a wonderful therapist the second year of grief. And she's also a widow. She's old, slightly older than I am, which hardly anybody is anymore, and, and just a little bit. But she had been a widow for 7 years, and she said to me, "The second year of grief is the worst," and that's what I was experiencing.
Okay.
Um, so
Mhm.
anyway, there were people who came, but there were people who left also.
Right. Yeah. And so what changed in you? Your ability to receive, or your ability to discern, or
What changed in me when?
in the process of weeding through the ones who weren't going to be
Oh,
there for you, and the ones who could, or the ones who you
well,
could
you know,
allow.
you kind of, I mean, the grief was so over. I was always writing almost the minute George died.
Yeah.
I started writing this book.
Yeah. Sure.
I wanted to capture the experience. So I had the writing, but I say in the book, I was writing at all hours of the day and night, pages of nonsense. I had to then go back and find the real stuff. But the book was written out of, writing has always been my way of resilience, my way of survival, right? So I went back to that, but in a new form, a memoir, which I had never written before. George and I wrote plays for George. He was a great actor, and we produced them together. So he was not just my husband, he was my artistic partner. And I lost all of that.
Yeah. I call those compound losses. It's like it's not just one thing. It's
right.
Everything.
It's everything. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And he was also beloved. I mean, our joke was everybody loves you and everybody hates me. And, and I have a much more volatile temper than he does. he was just beloved by many, many people. He was charming, he was brilliant, he was friendly, he was enormously talented. But he was so enormously talented that he believed, and he wrote this in his diary, and I quote it in the book because I quote from his diary, that you're put on earth to help other people, to encourage other people. And he founded Theater for the New City, which still runs in New York. He produced many of the great downtown avant-garde artists. He had an eye for talent. And he spent a lot of his time, instead of creating a fancy acting career for himself, producing other people, including me. And I wrote him wonderful parts, but he was not after fame and fortune. He was after what moved him. He loved the poetic play. He loved my work. I was very, very lucky.
Yes. And you are here. So how do people find your work? Tell us about the book that's being published, about to be.
Yeah, there are two books that are coming out at exactly the same time. Okay. One is the memoir, which is called Last Radiance, Radical Lives, Bright Deaths. And it is the story from my childhood, my father, Julian and Barbara, George, but also the life we lived in the downtown avant-garde theater scene, where we knew a lot of fascinating people. They all walk through the book. So that's one book. And at the same time, the woman who publishes my plays has a wonderful press called Laertes Books, and she is bringing out 4 of my full-length plays and 1 short play. So it's called 4 by Malpede plus an intervention. And 2 of those plays are from the 1980s. Us, which is the play I met George in, which is 2 actors play 6 characters, themselves and their parents, in 11 scenes of psychosexual dynamics. And the couples are both separated by class and ethnicity. So it all, works through that. And then the next play is Better People, which was done in 1988. And that's about reproductive technologies and genetic engineering. It's just as relevant now as it was then. Then it was cutting edge. Now, we have surrogacy, we have, all kinds of, anyway, it's a take, a look at genetic engineering and reproductive technologies. And it's a surreal fantasy comedy. And then 2 plays from this century. One is called Other Than We, and it's a post climate change world where 3, a neuroscientist, an obstetrician, gynecologist, and a man who's a refugee from Africa from a climate catastrophe that swept his family away. And he's the sole survivor, and he's carrying that grief. They decide to engineer a new race that will be capable of living on this denuded planet.
Mhm.
So it will have 4 legs and be able to live without much water and, all these characteristics. But the main thing that they engineer is that the head will no longer be separate from the heart. And so these new creatures will be incapable of cruelty for cruelty's sake. They will be incapable of it.
Mm.
So this drama of birthing these newbies, they're called, is the drama of the play. And Opa, who's the George character based on Noam Chomsky, is a linguist. And at the end of the play, he turns into an owl, which was an amazing theatrical coup, which George did in full view of the audience. It was extraordinary, with the costume designer Sally Ann Parsons, who's worked with us for 35 years. He became an owl in front of the audience and became the bird of wisdom who watches over these little newbies who are just newbie, and but they sing a song at the end of the play with the owl. The owl, woo woo, he's losing language and they're gaining language, and they're asking, how do we live with kindness and restraint, is what they say. So they answer their own question. So there's that play, and then Blue Valiant, which is a play about a horse, and the people around this ungovernable horse, all with their own grief stories, is the last play that George did live in 2022. We produced it outside on a farm, and there's a film version of it. We filmed the performance, and that is on YouTube. You can watch it. If you Google Blue Valiant, there you see it.
Okay.
But that's in the book. And the last play in the book is called Dinner During Yemen, which is a short political play that we did there were 8 playwrights who wrote short plays about Yemen, which is again in the news because the Houthis are trying to defend the Palestinians. And they're getting bombed by the US and others. So those are the plays in the book.
Yes. I have never been a fan of fiction. I think I lost it at The Godfather. A scene in The Godfather was too much for me, or it might have been Jaws. But either one of those, because my imagination is on the printed pages.
I don't like all the violence in film.
Yeah, but getting to know you this little bit and hearing you describe them makes me think I'm going to go do that. So where will these be available? Where can we get them?
Both books are coming out October 28th.
Okay.
They're both from small publishers, but you can order them from Barnes and Noble, from any bookseller, even Amazon, which I don't like myself, but a lot of people order books from Amazon. But they're available. They won't be, because they're small publishers, they won't be on the shelves of big bookstores. They'll be on the shelves of a few in my neighborhood, but you can order them and from anywhere.
Wonderful. And do you have a website?
I do. I have a website for the theater. It's called theater3collaborative.org. Okay. And then it has pages about me, but it has also the whole record of much of the work, not all the work, but much of the work we did together is documented with photos and articles and interviews. And so Jim Hansen, who's considered to be one of the greatest climate scientists in the world, he spoke to the audience after my climate change play, which called Extreme Weather, which his life was inspirational to me for writing the play. So, and he read the play and he vetted it for the science. It was all correct. He had no corrections to make, but it also was based on his life being censored by the government. He resigned from the government. Anyway, so he speaks, and there are lots of interesting people on our website who spoke about the work that we did.
The power of story really comes to life when we have the author to discuss it with us. I appreciate that so much. How can we serve you what is it you most need in your life right now that our audience might be able to help with?
Readers.
Readers. All right. And reviews, readers and reviews.
Readers and reviews. Yes, write your review on Amazon, write your review on Goodreads, write your review, readers and reviews. And then if you want to get more in touch with me, get in touch with me. Yes.
Beautiful. Karen, thank you so much for your time today. I so appreciate having you on the show.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Kim.